All right. So thank you again for joining us. We are at the third session in the alternative lending and financing session, and I think we've saved the best for the last. I wanted to introduce, he might be known as a financial consultant, but in fact, he's really a t-shirt designer.
I am indeed, yes.
Personal branding. For those of you that don't know, Andrew designed a different t-shirt for every single day of Money 2020, and each has been amazing. So
available for auction, you know, to be able to fund my next Money 2020 trip or whatever.
So without further ado, Andrew Vorster.
Thank you very much. So that's my headline there. Money 2020, one nice soft and one that was just a little bit more politically correct. But I believe credit scoring is broken, fundamentally broken. And I'm going to tell you a very, very personal story to demonstrate that. And the story involves my two daughters, who are very, very different. These are my two daughters, right? And as with most kids, they're almost complete opposites. One is very academic, analytic, very thoughtful, and the other one's very easygoing, and she just likes to get through life, nice. The one on the right wants to conquer the world. The one on the left wants to save the world. And they both, though, like to have a good time. You know, easygoing one, always, you know, let's have a good time. Life is about living. The other one spends like crazy. As a matter of fact, she thinks that money is to be made, to be spent. And she goes, yeah, she'll buy anything that she wants at any point in time. The other one's just a little bit more cautious, and she'll go, you know, what, that, how much does that cost? Are you kidding me? You know, and as a result, you know, at the end of the month, one of them has usually got some money to save, and the other one has sort of got an empty wallet. But over the same 6-week period of time, one of them managed to secure a £250,000 mortgage, and the other one had to come to her mum and I to stand surety for a 1-year rental agreement. Now, which one do you think got the £250,000 loan? Exactly. It's the big spender. The one who's got multiple credit cards, who's got loans, who's got store credit, who spends money like crazy. She's got a £250,000 loan. And the other one, who has enough savings to pay for her blimming rent for 3 years in advance, had to come to us to stand surety. Now that's wrong. That's very, very wrong. But of course we all know why. It's because the one that spends has built up this huge digital footprint that's being analyzed. And as far as lenders are concerned, she's great because she just spends and takes more credit and spends and takes more credit, and that's exactly what they want. And is that really a behavior that we want to encourage? Surely there's better ways of assessing whether or not somebody can be trustworthy and whether we should lend them money. Like the one that really saves and is really cautious and wants to help and save the world and do good. But she doesn't get a chance. I think that's wrong. Now, of course, you can take a little bit too far. I don't know, those of you that are aware of
China's government
what's going on in
what
China?
It calls a social credit system. The system will use data to track and then punish or reward the behavior of individuals and organizations. The system hasn't been finalized, but it will work something like this. Using data from government departments, financial institutions, and the internet, the system will create credit records that track individual behavior and assign a rating to each citizen. Do something bad, like fall behind on your bills, break traffic rules, or spread unapproved information online, and your credit rating falls. Do something good, like volunteer to pick up trash in a park, and your rating goes up. If your rating dips too low, it could make it harder for you to take out a loan, travel abroad, even get your kid into a desirable school. Some critics say the system is an Orwellian effort to track and control people, one that turns big data into Big Brother. Chinese officials say the system is necessary to rebuild trust between people, businesses, and the government that has crumbled in the country's rush to develop. They say without that trust, the country's further development could stall out. Pilot projects are being run in different parts of China. In Hangzhou, authorities have threatened credit penalties for things like cheating on subway fares, littering, and lighting up in non-smoking areas. In Shanghai, adults who don't visit their parents often enough could see their ratings dip.
I don't think that's a bad
In
thing,
the
by the way.
northwestern region of Ningxia, officials say the credit system will be used to punish people who have more children than legally permitted. Beijing's goal is to have the system up and functioning nationwide by 2020. To do that, the central government will have to build a platform to collect and analyze the massive amounts of data that China already collects on its 1.3 billion citizens. It will also have to convince the country's tens of thousands of government departments, courts, agencies, and credit companies to cooperate and share the data. If it can overcome those barriers, the government will have successfully rebooted its system of social control for the 21st century, giving China's leaders unprecedented power to monitor and modify the behavior of people and organizations.
Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the right solution, because that maybe is just a little bit too far for my liking. But there's something probably between where we are now and something that goes to that extreme that is probably a hell of a lot better than today. So I'm gonna, you know the drill now, we've got a quick poll. Now I'm gonna see if perceptions change over the time of this panel. So I fundamentally believe credit scoring is absolutely broken, they're of no use whatsoever. If you do too, please log in to the Slido app, hashtag Money2020, track room 3, and please tell me on that scale, where do you believe it is? You know, of course I vary between, you know, they're completely broken to they're freaking immoral. Let me just point out that that is a question, an option down the bottom there. And we'll see by the end how many of you will agree with me on that point. While you're all voting, and please can I encourage that once voting is over, please submit questions. Yesterday I had a great panel and I managed to get through a load of audience questions for the panel. So I've got a loose direction I'm going to take this in, but I'd much prefer it to take in the direction that you want to take it in. So the more questions you submit and the more votes we get on them, the more I'm going to be throwing these questions, which is much better because I have no idea what I'm going to be asking them anyway, and it's much better when you guys get involved. So I'm going to introduce the panel to you while we've got that poll running, and then we'll take a stop at the end of it. So first we have Mark. Now, I just have to tell everybody who isn't used to my style of introductions, everybody, when you speak to panelists beforehand, they've always got this marketing spiel that they, oh, you know, we're this and I'm that and I do that. And I throw them a curveball every time. And everybody goes, huh? And I say, pick your favorite pair of shoes that most describes you. Tell me why and what. And they all go, what? And once they've answered, they realize that that's how they're going to be introduced. So, as a result, we've got Mark Stein from Underwrite AI, who likes to be very practical and deliver value over appearance. That's what Mark is all about. We've then got Freddie from Credit Kudos, who's a geek who picked up the habit of wearing trainers and not shaving from his time in San Francisco. We've then got Luis, who I think you would probably agree with the statement, says he looks awesome and feels like $1 million. I present to you Luis, and Luis is from City Ventures. And then at the end, we have Leandro, who is so much in love with his pair of trainers, that his passion for running, that it's almost as much as his passion for data and analytics, where he is a professor and does analytics for Experian. So I think we've got a great range of different people here for the panel with different points of view, and I'm going to kick it off. And please, if you guys can submit answers, can we just have a check there? Not great, but certainly better than nothing. Good and getting better than all the time. Immoral. Who's the 1%? I'm up with you. Yes, they're freaking immoral. I'll tell you why later on.
Andrew, you said it was okay to interrupt, so I'm
Please.
wondering about those questions because I thought you were going to have one that said absolutely broken, it should be. You know, I think that...
It does. Absolutely broken. They're of no use whatsoever. Only 9% agree. We'll see how that audience perception
I didn't realize they
shifts by
were
the end.
moving as the questions were being answered.
Yeah, no, they get ranked as we go over there. And we'll see how many I can shift. My aim is to shift from the 1% of people who believe they're immoral to much more of the audience believing they're freaking immoral as we've got them at the moment. So I'm going to kick off. And the first person that I'm going to be asking is, Freddie, is credit scoring broken?
I think so. I mean, I think, as we mentioned before we came on, it works for some people and probably reflected in those results because a lot of the people in this room probably don't have problems with credit, hence they're at a financial technology conference. But I think you look at the way the methods work and how opaque the process is in general. You know, most people don't even know that these things are going on when they're applying for a loan, and if they do, at best, you know, they have very little influence into what goes into a credit score, and I don't think that's fair.
And are there other ways? Are there better ways? Are they better than just, you know, as my daughter got, yeah, you spend a lot of money, so yeah, have a lot of money because you spend a lot of money, which sort of is the way that it feels like it is.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously I'm going to say that, but I think, you know, there's two things. You know, obviously, if I'm a terrible spender and I you know, take out a bunch of credit cards and don't repay them, that's important. But also, it's about behavior. And you know, much as now, you know, if I'm starting to learn to drive, I can fit a box to my car and it can track me and show that I don't speed and I don't go through red lights and all that good stuff, and shows that I should be a good risk. I should be able to do the same with my credit. You know, I shouldn't have to have this chicken and egg system where I have to go and get a credit card and start borrowing money and repaying it at a certain rate, and there's this sort of weird hidden rules about how it works. You know, it should be, if I'm good with my money, then I get a loan, and it should be that simple.
So, Leandro, I'm going to let you jump in because I believe you don't think it's as broken as I'm making it out. And, you know, tell me what Experian thinks, or tell me what Leandro thinks and what Experian thinks.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Well, I personally believe that it's not broken, it's evolving. And I mean, things has been changing over time, and they're going to do so for quite a long time. But what is changing right now, it's the data that we have. So I think the entire credit business system, let's put that way, it's based on trust. So how do I will provide loan to somebody that I don't know? And this is a very fair question, especially if you are a lender. So how do you answer that question? I think this is the point that makes me believe that credit score is evolving. Because as this is a trust-based system, so I'm going to give you something in order to you pay me back in the future. So how do I expect this to happen if I don't know you in this case? So could work in two ways. I mean, when you have people information that could come from the bureau in the countries that you have a bureau, or it could come from your own data if you are a lender or if you are a big retailer. So there are both ways to work with that and to build what we can call credit scoring, because in fact it's an evaluation if I will give you something or not in a future promise of payment. So I think that's why it's not broken. And there are some cases when you can merge both, and this will make a very big difference. So depending, of course, but from country to country, so on the underdeveloped or developing countries, like Brazil, where I'm from, so we have 200 million people. Half of these people, they do not have even a bank account, so 100 million people. And how do we evaluate them? And we have one of the biggest retailers in the world there in Brazil. How do those guys evaluate people in order to, I don't know, to allow them to buy a refrigerator? So they use their own data. So it's a credit scoring way of doing this, but using different data.
It's not an Experian credit score, it's not a FICO score, it's they're using data to make their own decision. Not
exactly, because we, for example, as Experian, we can support them in order to help to build that that score using their own data with different capabilities or types of business.
Interesting.
So considering these different, let's say, different ways of creating let's say, a credit score, that's why I think it's involved, not broken.
So I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to carry on coming back to you on that. But actually, I want Mark to jump in, because there's something that Leandro had said, and I know that it's something that you and I had discussed, and somebody's already asked the question, which I've highlighted there. In terms of, I know that you've got a different take on how credit scoring could possibly be done. And the question was, can analytical models of probability of default on overall portfolios with higher margins be a risk for individual weaker consumers? But talk to me about how you think that credit scoring could be done better, because you've got some really interesting research that you guys have done.
But let me first just be, contrarian to your contrarian viewpoint. I think if you understand who the credit structure model was created for and who it was created to benefit, you see it really isn't broken at all. The current system of credit, kind of builds on the truism that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And it's primarily incentivized to drive revenue for lenders by mitigating their risk and increasing their margin. In the case of your daughters, this is a very good example, and I don't mean to be cold-hearted, but your if we can call her your good daughter, is not of interest to a card issuer. She's exactly the kind of customer they don't want. She's not going to spend any money, and then when she does spend money, she's going to pay it off before there's any interest accrued. She's a total waste of their time. And
so credit scoring is not broken for the people who are offering credit, and credit scoring is not broken for the people who want lots of credit.
If you are affluent and you have a large credit history, then you will have access to depository funds at very low interest rates. We've created a structure culturally in this country in which there are three tiers. There are people who have access to cheap funds, which are at depository institutions. There are people who have access to expensive funds, which are lent on leverage and more expensive and greater risk. And there are people with access to no funds at all. Now, you go into emerging markets and you get two classes. You have the affluent class who has available credit. People, say in India, who have CIBIL files and existing credit, they have access to bank credit. Then you have everyone else. So I would say one of the impediments to fixing the problem is the realization that I think you're dealing with kind of, in an ideal world, people would be rewarded with credit for
good
behavior. But that's not the motivation. Yeah, but that's not the motivation of capital. That's kind of the problem there. I do think there are much better ways to do it within the constraints of the fact that it still is a profit-driven business, which is that if you look at it in the U.S., the current model of using linear regression to analyze credit risk is fairly effective from FICO 700 score up. And the further you get from 700, the less efficacy it has. So when you get down into the low 600s and the high 580s, you might as well flip a coin rather than use a credit score. My proposal is that if we look at this population from a standpoint of doing nonlinear modeling, look at more data, not necessarily data that doesn't come from a bureau. We work with data from bureaus and alternative bureaus, but when we do a subprime analysis, we look at 2,400 attributes instead of 4. And I think that the further you get away from that break point of 700, you need more data, and you need to look at it in terms of combinatorial factors and not simply looking for a linear relationship between debt to income and charge-off, or FICO and charge-off. So that's what we're focused on, is how do we create models that allow lenders who are profit-driven to lend effectively in markets that they currently ignore because they don't have effective means of understanding the risk.
So actually, that's a question that I've highlighted there is what are some of the groundbreaking data sources, that are now utilized in credit scoring? And what are some of the hidden gems still to be mined? And I'm going to bounce that off to Luis once you've done, but what kind of data sources are you seeing that are useful for assessing the credit risk? I know you've done some interesting work in the Philippines as well around thin files.
Sorry, again, as you said, it's okay to interrupt. Before we go into data sources, let me make a comment about what you were saying, because I am on the camp that it's not completely broken, but that it has major cracks for sure. And I would posit that even for 700 plus credit scores, the prime population where a lot of lenders are clearly very focused on, there are very significant improvements that you can deploy by using some of the alternative data sources that we're going to talk about, and some other mechanisms that I'll talk to in a moment. But I'll give a very personal example, which is that as I was buying a ski home and I was applying through a loan, and I found the best possible rate in a small community bank, I was very surprised that I didn't qualify for the lowest rate bracket, and my credit score was north of 700, probably just barely there. And there were like random things that were bringing it down, such as significant credit card spend, but I paid it all full, but they just looked at the snapshot at the time that they did it. There was some derogatory claim because of a healthcare bill I never got and was paid late, and they refused to take it out even though it had been paid. So there were completely crazy anomalies there. I could have paid for a ski home, all in cash, but obviously, there's a mortgage interest, benefit, et cetera, so I chose not to. But I was shocked that I wouldn't be able to access the highest credit bracket, right? So I think that everywhere within the credit spectrum, obviously it's much more severe when you go into thin files, but across the board, there are big opportunities for improvement.
I would agree completely. I mean, I get debited every month because Fair Isaacs think that I owe American Express $30,000. I don't owe American Express $30,000. I have a line. It gets paid off at the end of every month. But I see that on every report. I agree with you. There's tremendous inefficiency in the system, and the root cause of the inefficiency is the fact that credit itself is a nonlinear problem, much like weather. And we traditionally have dealt with it with linear models, such as linear regression. And so we try to find a limited number of attributes that will linearly and directly correlate to an outcome. The FICO score, I don't mean to beat up on it. I think it's a fairly good generalized score. The problem I have with the FICO score is that it's a fairly good generalized score. When we build a score, for instance, we look at all the data attributes that a lender has available to them, whatever they are, but raw attributes. And we build a model based upon how those attributes correlate to their outcome. So we're interested in the intersection of underwriting values to the behavior of their consumer base and how that's reflective in charge-offs or profitability. So we don't build a model that applies to subprime consumers. We build a model that applies to the audience of a particular lender with the data that they've got. So we're always looking for validated third-party data. Now, we work with primary bureaus, we work with alternative bureaus such as Clarity, Factor Trust, Microbill, DataX. We work with the three primes. In India, we work with Sybil. We'll work with whatever data we've got. The more data, the better. But what I find is the most powerful technique is if we pull a prime bureau and we pull an alternative bureau, such as Factor Trust or Clarity. And we avail ourselves of utility payments, cell payments, rent-to-own payments, payday payments with somebody like Clarity. And so we take those two data sources, and then we have the customer log into their bank, and we get access to the transaction log of the bank. And we categorize the spending, and we're able to break down spending into discretionary and non-discretionary accounts so that we can determine who actually has the ability to repay a given loan based upon their actual spending habits.
Based upon their behaviors?
Yes.
You're modeling.
You put all those three together and you build a nonlinear model on that, and then you have a really, really powerful model. And what we've discovered is, I did an interesting study recently in which we looked at a very large data set of a lender that was testing into the unscored population, which was, a dream to me. So we had this large pool of people who had no FICO scores, and we wanted to see, well, how did they perform? Well, the overall portfolio had a 10% charge-off rate. People without FICO scores, who otherwise would never be approved, had a 14% charge-off rate. So if you look at the tiering of this lender, was there a tier that expected a 14% charge-off rate and would be profitable to lend to? Of course there was. So they're leaving this customer base, they're simply ignoring this customer
because
base.
they haven't got a score.
Because they have no score. You have to go beyond the score.
Just the score.
Or you're never going to address 100% of the market.
So I'm going to pick up on terms of some of the sources other than bank transactional data, because I'm going to come back to you about bank transactional data in a second. But I know that Citi Ventures has in the past dabbled with, the question was, completely different sources of data, perhaps even non-financial data. What kind of stuff has Citi been involved in the past? And
yeah, so across the board, Citi Ventures, for example, introduced into Citi, years ago, a company called the Mist Data, which is the one that I introduced you to, and what they've done is, basically aggregate a number of alternative credit data sources, but also other data sources that may be behavioral, and as such, provide an overall, layer that you can leverage.
Something like the China one,
So,
reputational data.
Yeah, so perhaps not.
Because I want my kids to get slapped down when they don't come and visit.
When they don't come visit
I'm getting
you,
older
that's very
now,
fair.
And, that's important.
Yeah, I think that from a behavioral standpoint, there's other companies as well that are trying to experiment. And for example, Revolution Credit, which is a company that we're, talking to, will look into what is the, individual psyche. How do they view certain things? How do they react to certain things? Take a test, a bit of gamification, and see how they behave with respect to things. So I think that there is information in terms of social media behavior. There's information that may be non-financial necessarily, where there are opportunities to also learn more about an individual. And we are experimenting, with those as well.
Can that be reconciled with the requirements of Fair Credit Reporting Act? I wouldn't want to explain to a customer through an adverse action notice that we looked at your social graph and we don't really like the people.
You've got some dodgy friends.
Yeah, you're
associating
with.
Drinking
that's not going to be considered a legitimate.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So obviously Citi does, business, across the world. So, those are very US-centric phenomenon. So obviously everything that Citi is experimenting with in the US is very much, compliant with all the disparate action themes. In many cases, you can use certain types of, data to help enhance decisions, right? So if a decision is to deny credit, but because you can demonstrate certain behaviors that are conducive to, the right type of credit behavior, then you're enhancing that. And if you do it in a way in which it's not resulting in disparate action, then it's very much welcome, right? Because it's helping broaden the credit box that otherwise you would have.
So I'm going to jump back to the transaction one now, because that is the highlighted one, and I know that this is something that you believe very strongly about, Freddie. So why do banks not use transactional level data to contextualize a customer rather than relying heavily on bureaus' narrow view of the credit world? And you know, this is almost going back to the days of I could walk in and speak to my bank manager and he would form an opinion on me, on the way that I conducted myself, as opposed to listening to what some random third party had said about me. So tell me about bank transaction level data. What does Credit Kudos do that's different?
Well, I think the first thing to point out is that we're talking about customers, and I don't think anyone actually chose to be a customer of the credit bureau. So I think it's a valid point. And you know, all of this data that we're talking about, all of this modeling, you know, in these circles it makes sense. But you know, you try and explain all of that to someone who's perhaps your daughter or someone who's going through this process, and it's completely confusing and quite baffling. So transaction data is incredibly useful, and especially as it becomes more available. What we do is we take transactional data. So our process is in sort of two parts. We allow companies that want to lend money to get that information, and then we allow them to do useful things with it in terms of analysis. But the really important point there is, you know, you have to have a relationship with the customer to get that data, and with things like PSD2 and open banking and in GDPR to some extent, you know, there needs to be consent models for getting any of this data, regardless of whether it's my transactional data, whether it's my device, location, everything we saw in that video. You know, it needs to be me as a consumer getting the value for my information, not you storing it and sort of putting a wall around it and making other people pay for it.
Exactly, because it's my data. It's
Precisely.
not the bank's data. Yes, I might need to give the bank a view of my data in order for them to make a decision if I'm applying credit with them, but it's my data. So I'm actually going to ask Leandro, you may not know the history and the origins. If anybody in the room knows the history and the origins, please tell me. Who the hell gave Experian and FICO the right to use my data and come up with a number that then controls my destiny, basically? Because can you imagine if I, today, decided I'm going to start a business and I'm going to give everybody in the world a score on employability. I'm going to say to employers, forget going through all that CV crap. We don't need CVs anymore. I've got a score on every person in the world. And if their score is over 6, they're worthwhile employing. If it's under 6, don't bother. If they're 0, fire them now. Can you imagine the backlash that would happen? And yet, that's what FICO and Experian did. That's where I think it's bloody immoral. I never asked for a number to be put on me. If my bank wants to know about me, I'll happily share the data necessary. But I never, ever gave my permission for some random third party to come up with a 3-digit number that stops me from living my life. And yet that's what we've allowed to happen. If that happened in any other area, we would go, that's outrageous. Why did we let it happen here? Do you know what the background was and how? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, but you're the man from Experian.
No, that's fair enough again. And well, in fact, your question is very, very important. I like one thing that you have mentioned regarding to who the hell allowed my bank to give other third parties data. The thing is, usually credit bureaus, they are born because the banks, they were sharing data between themselves. And in order to gain efficiency on trying to do this sharing of data, because they would like to, okay, you were there, now you are here, they didn't give you thing, but why should I give you something? So they started to
So
sharing
like getting
this
a job, I'll do exactly the same thing with the CVs and getting a job, because I go, you were there, but they fired you. Yeah, score goes down.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Don't give people ideas.
By the way,
Don't give people this idea. But the thing is, usually they start to share information in order to try to track who you are, because it's like I said in the beginning. If the lenders, they don't know who people are, how they can trust and how they can give people something, I mean, in this case, money back to them. And there's this very specific point that a market point out, very interesting, that is, and there was a question on the screen say that, well, why not should thinking about relying on other sources of data, not just on bureau data? Because otherwise, if you will remove bureau data, maybe it could be a myopy thing. But the thing is, maybe we can join both things. So what you said, instead of looking for linear approaches, that was something that was very useful in the past. Now that's what sustains my case that it's evolving. Because we are moving from that linear approach, maybe a single logistic regression with a single probability between 0 and 1 that will become that number. And I'm trying to explain or to look at you in this case, in a more detailed way, so I can really give you a better answer. I can explain better why should I give you something or not. And there is a very important thing that the entire world of credit scoring takes place that is related to, okay, if I get a person that sounds good in the view of the model, I would try to give that person something with a low interest than the one that I'm not so sure. Let's not say that it's a bad person. Let's say that we are not sure about it. So the entire system is based on that. And like you said, that they are profit-oriented. And they should be. I mean, they're trying to run something to sustain that. So joining now the two arguments. So usually the credit bureaus, they started with private companies sharing data between themselves. In order to gain efficiency, they created a separate company that emerged as a credit bureau. And then the market is the market. Some of them has sold their part, the other one has bought it, and this is how things goes.
So
can I jump in on?
Please.
Because I think, and not to be too much of an apologist on your side, since you're getting a lot of heat, but if you think about what would be an alternative world in which there wouldn't be a fundamental, uniform credit score. Just picture it. And there are places in the world where nothing like this exists.
Exactly. And it's
what is the extent of credit availability in those places, right? So I think that if you look into what has been the history of the credit bureaus and what has been the impact to the economy, to society, of having an easier, more uniform way for credit to be deployed at scale, I will argue that one of the reasons that the more developed economies tend to have greater levels of credit penetration is thanks to the bureaus. Now, I completely am also on the camp that it's not, perfect. It has major cracks and there's a ton of improvement to do, but it is an important basic foundation. So
my counter-argument would be that in the past, we needed those credit bureaus because we didn't have the computer processing power for any individual institution to compute that under their own algorithms. Nowadays, compute processing power is dead cheap. I personally believe that my history is mine, and under GDPR, and the right for me to be forgotten, but also the right for me to retain my own data. I want to take ownership of my own data. I want all of my data about me to travel with me. And then if I want to apply for credit, I want that institution to make up their own mind. I don't want them to ask somebody else. Now, in the past, they had to ask somebody else because it was tough, it was difficult, it was hard. They needed they got together and it was cheaper. They can't use that excuse anymore. The reason why those bureaus were successful in the past is it's like any of the big sort of central exchanges. It's a shared cost to be able to take out the cost. That is not an argument anymore. Each individual should be able to make the decision on me as a person, segment of one.
But it's not your data.
It is my data.
No, it's not, because
it's my data.
The Bureau doesn't contain your data. The Bureau contains data received from merchants that you elected to do business with about whether you paid or didn't pay the debt. So it's not a reflection of you as an individual. It is data acquired from a merchant who you freely contracted to do it.
It's still about me.
What's about me?
And under GDPR, if it's about me, they can disclose information about a customer, but they've got no right to attribute it to me. That's my right. It is my data. They've got no right to attribute it to me.
But if a lender can only look at you, now with what you're talking about, in the EU, you're talking about essentially creating a governmental structure that replaces the Bureau. Okay, you still have an aggregation of data.
No. They're not planning to keep the data. The GDPR is the framework under which data can be shared. It sets out the rules, and as far as I'm concerned, people have been free and fast with my data in the past. There's companies that have made billions off my data for which I've got no value. One of them being the bloody credit bureaus, who made billions out of brokering data about me that I never offered to give them in the first place.
But if you want to buy a car,
Yep.
and I sell cars,
Yep.
and I want to know whether you paid for the last car that you bought.
I will freely give that up to you as an individual for the context of that transaction. Single, one point in time, a snapshot. The kind of a thing that you guys do. A snapshot, yeah?
Yeah, although I think the snapshot question is an interesting one because in the way that availability of data is changing, it's now possible that we'll be able to have a continual view of someone's behavior, which is arguably a better situation. Very often people, change throughout the course of a loan, and if the timeline is a mortgage, what I look like today
is contextualized for the mortgage.
Yeah.
So, but it's context around that for that one single thing.
Yeah.
Surely that would be fairer way of assessing credit.
I think,
and use of data.
We're also just assuming that it needs to work in the same way that it currently works. Credit fundamentally means trust, right? And the reason we have a credit bureau is that we can't have a relationship with someone we've never met and know whether to trust them and know anything about them. So the data is there to make an analysis of whether I'm going to repay. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be certain attributes from certain things. It can be a whole combination. You look at if I transact on eBay, the credit bureau is not involved. It's my feedback score and my, aggregate level of whether I'm a good seller. So, just assuming that, we have to just put more data into this big machine and somehow it's going to get better, I think is the wrong way to look at it. It's about the consumer process, and if the model is such that it reflects good financial behavior, why should it be that the consumers don't understand that too? Why should it not be that I can absolutely understand that what I do today is going to affect my outcome tomorrow?
In this alternative world that you're envisioning, say a bit more, because I'm having a hard time understanding where would you put those boundaries, right? So are you proposing that instead of the imperfect current world in which there is some fundamental data about vast majority of financial transactions that the credit bureaus aggregate, that then one can complement via transactional level data, via alternative data, via some behavioral data, you're envisioning that every individual would be obligated to fully disclose all of their financial dealings whenever they apply for credit.
Correct.
And what else? And who's going to be monitoring that there's no moral hazard there? Of course, for me, only showing my positive, credit behavior because I, of course, want to get the most credit at the best possible rate, right? So there are major implications there. And what about other behavioral, other transactional data, other, my overall behavior on things that may not be standard credit lines? So are you envisioning that suddenly, a bit of the, perhaps China-like model whereby it's not only social data, but also financial data, and just all data about you will have to be carried by you in a way in which it's policed to ensure there's no moral I just find that so much more complicated than let's start with a foundation that we have, and let's add to it the areas that can make it better.
So the reason why I like pushing the thinking is to be able just to move that pendulum more. So if I describe a world that's way over here and everybody goes, that's impossible, at least they've got them thinking about it. So it moves them away from where they are at the moment. So logistically, do I expect that to happen? Well, logistically, at home, I have a big filing cabinet. It's got my transactions for the last 5 years in freaking paper, because most of the bloody financial institutions I deal with still, up until very recently, have sent me paper. So I've got paper records going back 5 years. I've got digital records going back for as long as any one of them have given me digital records. And if I had to sit down with a tax man tomorrow and disclose something, I am obligated to be able to say, here's all the information. Unfiltered, unfettered, but there's a context the tax man is investigating. And in the same way, if I wanted to start a new relationship with somebody that was new, that I hadn't yet built up a history, they don't know who I am, I've just knocked on the door. Luis, I'm come over to City and I want to start a relationship with you. If you say, okay, Andrew, for me to trust you, I need to know a little bit more about you. I need to know at least your mortgage payments. Have you made them all? Yes, within the context of this, I'll disclose all my mortgage payments to you. You don't have to know how much I spend on vodka every month. You don't have to know anything else about me. You have to know, have I made my mortgage payments or not? Maybe if it's something a little bit more, complicated and, because maybe I'm just asking you for an overdraft. Maybe if I am asking you for a £500,000 mortgage, you want to know a lot more about me. Hey, Andrew, how much money do you spend on vodka? Hey, that one hurts, but I'm quite happy to tell you that one as well, because you've asked for it. And if I don't give you that information, then it will seem like I've got something to hide. So I'll disclose that, but within the context. And if I choose, you're now asking something too personal, I can go, you know what, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. I don't have those options today. I've got score, no score, credit, no credit. But hang on a minute,
But
I just want to quickly...
Just to add something on the top on that, because it is interesting. On this case, there is one beautiful thing on the GDPR stuff, that is the proportionality. So should we get all data in the world? Should we use unethical data or something like that? No, you're right in this case. That's perfectly true, because, in order to make a calculation of your probability of default, let's put that way, maybe there is no need to know where you were yesterday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And that's fair enough. But it's still, you need to know something. And what you said about, okay, I will carry my right in order to give you my data. This is something that the legislators, they are doing around the world, and they are trying to cut in the edge of something that might be exceeding the legal or the ethical thing in this case. And this is important. And one thing that is related to the question that it's on blue on top, and it's related to what you said, okay, I will go to a place and to buy a car. You got the right to not give that person your data because it's your data. But on the other hand, the business has the right to not give you the loan.
Correct, yes.
And that's the point. And then if they give you the loan, they will remember that, okay, Andrew was a good payer. And then maybe they have a friend that owns another car loan shop. In this case, they will, oh, do you know Andrew? He was here yesterday asking me for a loan. Yes, I do. I know him. He has paid me before, I know, 20 years ago. Oh, he's a good guy. He is. You had a credit bureau. A very single one, maybe one piece of paper, but you had one.
Yes.
But if you take out 5 loans and you pay 4 of them back, mm-hmm. and you simply just ignore one, mm-hmm. all right? Do you have the right to report the 4 that you had good payment on when you apply for a new loan and not disclose the one that you defaulted on, or is that outside your control?
No, I think that should be outside your control. So and there would be traceability. How did I pay that 4th loan, or how did I not pay that 4th loan? So I'm not disputing the record of transactions, and I'm not suggesting editing it so that we've all got a Instagrammable credit record, where it's only the best foot forward that everybody puts there. But I do want more control than I've got today. We need to wrap up. It's really disappointing that I didn't get to. It was interesting. There's a very good point raised there. Consumer credit is simple. SME credit scoring, that has got to be tough, but that would be a whole different panel and a whole different question altogether. So I run out of time. The last thing that we're just going to do is I want to see if the attitude in the room has changed at all. So I want to pull up the Slido poll again, and I'm going to ask you guys that are sitting here now how each one of you would have voted, because I know that none of you could have voted in that Slido poll. So if you could have, Mark, where would you have voted on those 5 questions?
Well, I would say not great, but good, useful, of some value, and hopefully improving, but anything but great, and not completely broken.
I go for the top one. Not great,
but better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Luis, not great, but better than nothing.
Me as well.
Not great, but better than nothing. Not even going with great, all we need right now? Oh, you didn't even know that was an option, did you?
You can change your answer.
No, in fact, things could evolve.
And I've managed to get
it's the
1
natural
other
way.
% of people now that's agreed with me. It's freaking immoral as it is at the moment. Thank you very much. Please give my panel a round of applause.